The house stood at the edge of our land, always locked, always silent, as if it were holding its breath. For years, I was forbidden to cross its threshold. My husband's warning was clear: that house is mine alone. You are never to enter it. At first, I obeyed without question. I told myself every marriage has boundaries, and this was his. But over time, the house became more than wood and stone. It became a question that gnawed at me in the dark. Why did he vanish there for hours? Why did he return with eyes I couldn't read? And why, when I once reached for the door, did his hand tighten on my wrist with such force that it left a bruise? Neighbors whispered about it. Some said he kept money hidden there. Others joked it was a mistress's nest. A few claimed he was involved in darker things. I never knew which rumor hurt me more: the thought that he might not trust me, or the thought that he might be hiding a life I was never meant to see. For years, I respected his command. I never touched the key. I never crossed the line. But when he died and the silence of our home swallowed me whole, I found the key resting in his drawer, as if waiting for my hand. And that was the moment I realized the truth he had hidden behind that door would either break me or set me free. Our marriage was built on unspoken agreements, the kind that seemed ordinary at first, but grew heavier with time. To outsiders, we looked steady, respectable, even enviable. He was a man of routine, firm in his manner, admired for his discipline. I was the dutiful wife, supportive and quiet, the kind who kept a home warm and orderly. Together, we seemed complete. But beneath the surface, there were cracks I tried not to see. He was affectionate in measured doses, never careless with his words, never soft without purpose. He kept his emotions like treasures in a vault, guarded, inaccessible. I told myself it was his nature, that love didn't have to be tender to be real. Yet some nights, as I lay awake, I wondered what it would feel like to be truly known by him. And then there was the house. It stood like a shadow at the edge of our land, 2 stories tall, its windows shuttered, its paint weathered but intact. To anyone else, it was just another property, unremarkable. To me, it was the forbidden place, the one I was never allowed to enter. He visited it often, sometimes late at night, sometimes at dawn. When I asked what he did there, he would only say, "It is not your concern." I tried to ignore it, to focus on the life we shared outside its walls. I cooked his meals, tended our home, accompanied him to gatherings where we smiled for others. But always, the house loomed. Its silence pressed against me. Its locked door felt like a wall in our marriage, one I could never climb. Neighbors noticed too. They teased me gently at first, asking if I had ever peeked inside, if I wasn't curious. Over the years, their curiosity sharpened into suspicion. Some pitied me, some laughed behind my back. But none of them knew how carefully I had trained myself not to think about it, because thinking too much made the distance between us impossible to ignore. The bond between husband and wife is meant to be trust, a shared life. But in our case, trust stopped at that locked door. And though I pretended to accept it, the truth was that part of him, perhaps the most important part, was a stranger to me. In a small town, secrets do not stay hidden for long. The house at the edge of our land became more than just his secret. It became everyone's fascination. Each time I went to the market, I could feel their eyes on me, their whispers brushing against my back. Some people asked outright, their voices laced with curiosity. "What does he keep in there? Why won't he let you inside?" Others only smirked, as if they already knew the answer and enjoyed watching me squirm. At family gatherings, the teasing was sharper. A cousin once joked, "Maybe he's hiding treasure in there and keeping you out so you won't spend it." The table laughed, and I forced a smile, though my chest tightened. Another time, a neighbor's wife leaned closer to me and whispered with false sympathy, "Or perhaps he's hiding someone." Her words struck like a knife. I laughed it off, but that night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying them until dawn. Humiliation came not just from their words, but from my own silence. Each time I said nothing, each time I let the questions pass, I felt smaller, weaker. Why couldn't I demand the truth? Why did I accept his command without protest? Was it loyalty or fear? I told myself it was respect for his boundaries, but in the quiet hours, doubt gnawed at me. Maybe I had been a fool. Maybe the man I called husband trusted me less than strangers did. And yet, even in my darkest doubt, I could not bring myself to break his rule. The house remained locked, its secrets intact. I convinced myself that opening that door would destroy more than my marriage, it would destroy me. But deep inside, I knew the truth. The humiliation I suffered outside was nothing compared to the humiliation I might face if I ever discovered what lay within. Nights were the hardest. When the world outside grew quiet and I lay alone with my thoughts, the house pressed against me like a weight. From my bedroom window, I could see its dark outline across the yard, its shuttered windows staring back at me. Sometimes I thought of it as a living thing, a presence that watched, waited, and whispered secrets I was not meant to hear. I would remember the sacrifices I had made for our marriage, all the parts of myself I had silenced in order to be the wife he expected. I had given him loyalty without question, obedience without protest. I had trusted that his rules were meant to protect us. And yet, the longer I lived with the unanswered questions, the more hollow that trust felt. What kind of love demanded silence instead of truth? At times I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps he needed privacy for his business, or maybe it was a space he had claimed for solitude. But then I would remember the way his eyes hardened if I so much as glanced toward the locked door, how his voice cut sharp when he reminded me, "That place is not for you." It was not the words themselves that haunted me, it was the fear behind them, the urgency with which he protected whatever was inside. As the years passed, the tension did not fade, it grew. The house began to feel like a wedge driven between us, a constant reminder that part of him was untouchable. And with every whisper I endured, with every sleepless night staring at its shadow, I began to wonder if the life I had lived with him was only half a life, if the real story of my marriage lay hidden behind that locked door. The first signs were small, almost too subtle to notice. A receipt crumpled in his jacket pocket for a store in another town I had never heard him mention. The faint smell of fresh paint on his clothes, though he claimed he hadn't been anywhere near the house that day. A keychain with an unfamiliar brass key, which he tucked away too quickly when he saw me looking. They were fragments, but together they formed a picture I couldn't ignore. He began spending more time away. Sometimes he returned late, his face pale, his mood sharp, as though the night had worn him down. Other times he came back almost buoyant, humming under his breath, as if whatever was in that house gave him life. When I asked about it, his replies were clipped. Work. Matters you wouldn't understand. Leave it be. The finality in his tone was a wall I had no strength to climb. But I saw the cracks even if he pretended they weren't there. Once, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him moving about in the kitchen, opening drawers, shuffling papers. I crept down the stairs and glimpsed him by candlelight, clutching a stack of letters with shaking hands before slipping them into his coat. He froze when he saw me, his eyes flashing with something I couldn't name: fear, guilt, anger. Then, without a word, he walked out into the night and didn't return until morning. Even the neighbors noticed. One old man who had lived down the road for decades muttered to me one afternoon, "He spends too much time there. Places like that don't stay quiet without reason." When I asked what he meant, he only shook his head and walked away. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, but each clue pressed harder against my chest. Every unanswered question echoed louder in my head. The house no longer felt like a silent building. It pulsed with secrets, and those secrets had begun to seep into our marriage. He thought he was careful, but the cracks were showing. And once cracks appear, it is only a matter of time before something shatters. The end came without warning. One morning, he simply did not rise from bed. His breath was shallow, his skin clammy, and before I could call for help, the stillness settled over him like a shroud. The doctor would later say it was his heart, that the years of strain had finally caught up with him. But to me, it felt like the house itself had claimed him, as though the weight of his secrets had pressed too heavily on his chest. The days that followed blurred together. The funeral was somber, filled with neighbors whose whispers never stopped, their eyes flitting toward me with pity and curiosity. Some offered condolences, but I could feel the unspoken questions lingering on their tongues. Would she go to the house now? What will she find? I avoided their gaze, clutching my grief like a shield. It wasn't until I began sorting through his things that I found it. Tucked in the back of his dresser, beneath folded shirts that still carried his scent, lay a small wooden box. Inside, on a simple chain, was the key. The brass was worn smooth from years of use, the same key I had seen him hide so many times. Only now, it rested in my palm, waiting. I sat there for a long time, the key heavy against my skin. Grief mixed with fear, with curiosity, with something I couldn't yet name. For years, I had obeyed his command, kept my distance, respected the silence. But now the silence was mine to break. He was gone, but the house remained. And at last, the door that had haunted me for so long was ready to open. The morning I carried the key across the yard, the air felt heavier, as though the world itself understood what I was about to do. The house loomed larger than I remembered, its shuttered windows staring down at me like unblinking eyes. My hands trembled as I fitted the brass key into the lock. For years, I had wondered what lay beyond this door, and now the answer was only a turn away. The lock clicked, sharp and final, and the door swung inward on a groan of hinges. Dust floated in shafts of sunlight cutting through cracked shutters. The air smelled of wood and paper, tinged with something older, something secret. I stepped inside. The first room looked almost ordinary, a desk, shelves lined with books, our rug worn thin. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw the details. The desk drawers overflowed with ledgers and letters, each carefully labeled. On the shelves, journals sat in perfect rows, each one marked with a date that stretched back years, years of a life I had never known. My heart pounded as I reached for one, the leather cool beneath my fingers. The handwriting inside was his, familiar, but sharper, more deliberate. And the words, they were not accounts of business, nor casual reflections. They were confessions. Every page told of choices hidden from me, properties bought under other names, debts paid to men I had never heard of, and meetings held in secret. Each entry was a window into a life lived in shadows. My husband had built not one life, but two, and I had only ever been allowed to see half of it. In the next room, I found evidence that chilled me deeper. Photographs pinned to boards, names written in his hand. Faces of people from town, neighbors, acquaintances, some crossed out, others circled. A record of alliances and betrayals, favors exchanged, secrets traded. My husband had been more than private. He had been calculating, weaving webs of control that stretched farther than I had imagined. He had ruled not with open strength, but with hidden strings. And then, tucked in a locked chest at the back, I found what changed everything. Inside lay bundles of letters bound with ribbon, each addressed to me. My breath caught as I opened the first one. His words spilled out like ghosts, apologies for the distance between us, explanations for the nights he vanished, pleas for forgiveness I had never been asked for while he lived. He wrote of shame, of sins he could not bear me to see, of fear that if I entered this house I would no longer love him. Letter after letter revealed the truth. The house was not simply a vault for his secrets. It was his confession, his penance, his attempt to contain the man he had been. He had locked me out not only to protect himself, but to protect me from the weight of his double life. Tears blurred the words as I sat among the papers, surrounded by the echoes of a man I thought I had known. The house was not what the neighbors had whispered. It was not a shrine to another woman, nor a vault of stolen wealth. It was something more fragile, more terrible, the evidence of a man who could not bear to show his true face to the person closest to him. I closed the last letter with shaking hands. Around me, the room seemed to sigh, their silence finally broken. For years, the house had stood as a wall between us. Now it was a mirror, showing me the truth I had both feared and longed to see. And in that truth, I felt the ground shift beneath me. My marriage, my life, my love, it had all been built on a secret I could never return from. The door had opened, and I could never close it again. When I finally stepped back out into the daylight, the air felt strange on my skin, cooler, sharper, as though the world outside had changed while I was inside. The key was still clutched in my hand, pressing into my palm until it left a mark. Behind me, the house stood silent, but it no longer looked mysterious. It looked heavy, like a grave filled with truths I could never unlearn. For days, I carried the letters with me, reading and rereading them until the words carved themselves into my mind. Each one revealed more of the man I had shared my life with, the man I thought I had known. I cried for the tenderness he had confessed only on paper, for the guilt that had eaten at him in silence. I raged at the arrogance that kept him from speaking those words to me when he was alive. And in the quietest hours, I felt the hollowness of betrayal, because whether his secrets were meant to shield me or not, they had stolen years of honesty from us. Neighbors noticed my silence and pressed harder with their questions. "Did you go in?" they asked. "What was inside?" Their voices buzzed with hunger for scandal, for confirmation of their rumors. I told them nothing. Some truths belonged to me alone, even if they burned to carry. At night, I sat by the window and looked toward the house. Once, it had been a wall between us. Now it was a mausoleum of memory, holding the shadowed half of my husband's life. I could not decide if I hated it or pitied it. All I knew was that its secrets no longer belonged to him. They belonged to me. And with them came a question I could not yet answer. Would I let his secrets bury me, too? Or would I find a way to live beyond them? The days turned into weeks, and though the grief of losing him still pressed heavy on me, it was the weight of his secrets that shaped the way others looked at me now. The neighbors who once smirked behind my back grew bolder with their questions, certain I held the story they had always wanted. I gave them nothing. Silence became my shield, and in that silence they spun their own tales, each one wilder than the last. But I had learned enough to know that letting them feed on gossip would only stain me further. His choices were not mine to answer for. Family members came, too, with feigned sympathy. They pressed their hands to mine, offered condolences, then leaned in with the real reason for their visit, to ask what he had left behind. They wanted money, property, explanations. Some hoped for scandal, others for inheritance. I sent them away with the same silence I gave the neighbors. The house was mine now, and so were its contents. His secrets were not a legacy I would divide like furniture. But there were consequences I could not avoid. The image of him in our town shifted. The man once respected for his order and strength was now spoken of in careful tones, his name carrying a shadow. Whispers of hidden dealings and mysterious ledgers began to spread. People who once admired him now questioned how much of their own lives he had entangled in his webs. In death, his reputation collapsed beneath the weight of the truth I alone had seen. Justice, I realized, does not always come from courts or punishments. Sometimes it comes in the quiet undoing of the image a man worked so hard to build. His arrogance had built that house, and in the end, the house told the truth he never could. The justice was in the unveiling, in the way the silence no longer protected him but exposed him. For me, justice was more personal. It was in holding those letters, knowing that even if he could not say the words aloud, he had written them for me. It was in realizing that his secrets, though heavy, could not define me unless I let them. And it was in standing before the house one last time, understanding that I had survived the truth he could not face. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of fire and gold, I walked to the edge of the property one last time. The house stood before me, unchanged on the outside, but no longer a mystery. Its shutters hung crooked, its paint peeled, its silence deeper than ever. Yet to me, it no longer felt like a fortress, it felt like a tomb. A place that had once held power over me now seemed small, finite, defeated. I carried the key in my pocket, its weight familiar. For a moment, I considered unlocking the door again, stepping inside, reliving the discovery. But I knew there was no need. I had already seen what mattered, already borne the truth. The rest could remain in shadow. Secrets lose their power once they are known. I turned the key over in my hand, then dropped it into the tall grass. It landed without a sound, swallowed by the earth. I would not carry it anymore. The house could keep its silence. I had taken back my own. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in years. The whispers of neighbors no longer cut me. The curiosity of family no longer chained me. What lay behind those walls was his burden, not mine. And I had finally laid it down. The path back to my home glowed under the fading light, each step steady, certain. I had lived in the shadow of a locked door, but no longer. Now I carried something stronger than answers. I carried freedom. And as the first stars emerged in the sky, I whispered to myself the truth that had taken me a lifetime to learn. Secrets do not destroy us. Silence does. And I would be silent no more.